Yeah. Right, we're live there. Live on this side. Live here. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to go into the command zone. Before we do that, buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. And on Saturday, we played Commander. We played a big Commander game. It was
Several,
you, me,
even.
and several, even three of them, I guess. It was you, me, and then friends of the cast, Frank and Josh, who all played together. And I guess we're talking about it is the way that we're gonna handle this.
Yeah, so part of this for me was that Magic recently released its kind of new ranking system for commander decks. This power levels 1 through 5, with 1 being like theme decks that aren't designed to win, 2 being your average precon, 3 being kind of like an upgraded precon, 4 being a competitive level deck that basically doesn't care about the meta is the way I best understand it, and 5 being CEDH, right? Where you're winning it. 5 being you're winning at any cost, and that includes like anticipating the meta and playing into the meta. Whereas 4 is kind of like at that level deck building wise, but with no concern for the meta, and so you will lose to a level 5 deck because you aren't anticipating meta stuff. Does that resound with you?
Yeah, and there's a lot of individual markers, I would say, probably about like individual kind of games and how individual kind of decks play out. One of the things I think happens at level 4 is, for instance, is you just see a lot of the same cards get played.
Yeah.
Because it's not that everybody's deck does the same thing. Maybe about 30 cards of their deck are different, but it's no longer people playing card draw. They're all playing the best card draw, and the best card draw is Rhystic Study, right? They're no longer playing ramp, they're playing the best ramp, and the best ramp is whatever, Smothering Tithe, right?
Yeah,
One of the games
draw
that
ramp
features
or 2 drop ramp,
yeah,
right?
they're no longer playing removal. They're exclusively playing path and Swords to Plowshares, and mass removal is always farewell. It's just like you're seeing a lot of the same cards every game. Your best disruption is always going to be stuff like Heroic Intervention is a card like this, Cyclonic Rift. There's just a number of different cards that look like that. And if you are watching, like if you're watching kind of Commander on YouTube or something, you're just seeing these same cards played every single game, every single time, because they are just kind of like that kind of good. And so there's this effective sort of smushing the, people are playing just good stuff is what they call these cards. Just people are playing all the good stuff.
Yeah, and so just kind of just to think about it. So we in our play group, I think the 2 strongest decks are probably Yuriko and AC, piloted by you and me respectively. And I don't think that's because they're particularly spectacular decks. They're just kind of like nicely synergistic, and there's I would say a level of almost accidental power, and I'm not calling it accidental because we're not trying to build effective decks. It's because Commander Ninjutsu and Ramp are just kind of like basically good things, and they can win games on their own. But I'm curious what you think the power level of Yuriko and AEC are at.
I would say that Yuriko and AC, I mean, they are the top end of our sort of play group and kind of meta. I think Yuriko is probably, I don't know, they're both actually very, very good decks, I think, to be honest with you. And I feel like in most pods, it really would just kind of depend on the draw. I bet they would have a pretty, like, if we were to just play 100 games, I bet the win rate would actually be pretty close to 50-50 for the 2 of them.
I'm sorry, I don't mean versus each other. I mean in this kind of Commander.
No, I understand. This is exactly, yeah, absolutely. But I'm just like, I actually think that the decks are probably about equal, really. Like, I don't even think it's not like I think Yuriko is the best deck and AC is number 2. I actually just think that they're actually probably on rate pretty similar. I actually think the only losses, Yuriko probably has an insane win rate over the course of like 10 years of Commander, and I think the only losses I've picked up on Yuriko are 2 AC. I also picked up a loss to Josh's deck recently. But anyway, the thing about Yuriko, Yuriko is a CEDH commander, which has like a CEDH build, but that's not the build that I'm going for. The CEDH build is all about top deck manipulation. So for those of you who don't know, Yuriko has an ability that says whenever a ninja deals combat damage to a player, so whenever you attack with Yuriko and it connects onto the enemy, right? You flip the top card of your library and each opponent loses life equal to the mana value of that card. The standard sort of CEDH build for Yuriko is all about extra turn spells, so you can keep chaining, you keep chaining stuff, and a lot of top deck manipulation. So what you're doing is you're manipulating the top cards, and you're really only attacking with Yuriko herself, or maybe maybe a few small ninjas, right? I have essentially built Yuriko as Ninja Tribal, which I would say is a very strong sort of like build for Yuriko. But if we were to like sit down at, I would say maybe my local. I don't. It were like I think Yuriko is not a 4. I think Yuriko and AC would both lose to other 4s basically. But in the context of our play group, they are sort of the 4s, right? They are the top end if we were to think about it in that sense.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree, and I actually think that there's an argument that they're almost like 2.5s, even that they're not even like pushing the 3, and I think this is because. And we were talking about this a little bit, is that the big thing that neither of us do is run tutors. And I think that tutors are a big enough class of card, and they are like they're explicitly called out, right? That the power ranking calls out these cards they call game changers, which are a handful of individual cards, and then as a class, mass land removal and tutors, right? And I think that our general lack of tutors kind of keeps the power level down. And I think that's actually probably the single best way to keep down the power level in a group, is to just like minimize the amount of tutors available to the group, because then it makes the format, I think, resemble what it's supposed to, which is kind of a more casual format that like pulls out the consistency in the decks, which is what causes, I think, the kind of top level CEDH type stuff to happen. And what, if I were going to be an angry Elder Dragon Highborn player, say, killed the format, right? Like, which is the reason why this kind of power level system happened.
I used to run tutors. I used to have a suite of tutors. I actually think I still have my demonic tutors somewhere, but I pulled it out of the deck because I thought it was unfun, right? It's just the I don't know. Like, I really think the variance is the thing that makes Commander fun, and that you have to play. That it's because it's that feeling of every game plays out a little bit differently. And in a certain respect, I actually kind of feel bad about Yuriko. I have made my Yuriko deck much better recently. Basically, I upgraded maybe about 10 cards, and it's the smallest things you could possibly imagine. I took out a couple of sort of synergy pieces that are what I would call kind of sort of like win more cards. I would call these enhancers, right? So for instance, I had a card that is called Arcane Adaptation. It's just an enchantment. When it comes into play, you name a creature type, and all your creatures are that type. It's the kind of thing that can be good in Yuriko because you name ninjas, and then all of your little 1/1s that you're typically bouncing, they all get to be ninjas, and then you just swing in with a bunch of unblockable 1/1s and get a gazillion Yuriko triggers kind of thing, right? But like, unless you have a big board with a lot of small creatures who are not already your ninjas in play, it's kind of worthless. And so I cut a card like that, and all I did was I put in a 1/1 flyer for 1 mana. Like a 1 mana 1/1 with evasion is insanely good for Yuriko, because what it does is it lowers the bound on how quickly I can get her out. I kind of used to have in Yuriko a number of sort of these 2 mana bounce creatures. So, for those who don't know, the kind of core conceit for ninjas is you attack. If your attacker isn't blocked, you can pay a mana cost and switch your attacker with a ninja. The idea is, they're wearing a disguise. They're wearing the disguise. And so if you have an evasive creature, a cheap evasive creature, that's actually really, really good. And something that I was finding in Yuriko was I was playing a lot of 2 mana evasive creatures that were getting bounced to my hand and gumming up a lot of kind of my mana, and just being able to 1 mana and then turn 2 attack Commander Ninjutsu in Yuriko seems to be like insanely good. And so that's kind of where I feel like the deck has really hit its sort of like 3.5-ish power level.
That makes sense.
And I feel like AC has a kind of similar thing going on, but it is more built toward Yuriko is an aggressive deck. Yuriko is a very aggro deck. So that's like early mid game is where Yuriko goes insane. And like Yuriko really wants to win on like turn 6 or 7 kind of thing. AC I feel like is like a mid or late game deck. Kind of we call these battle cruiser decks, I think.
Yeah.
Where it's just like you spend your early turns kind of setting your shit up, and then once it is like going, you just have a more powerful engine than everybody else at the table. And I think AC does in fact generate a pretty ridiculously powerful engine pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, and that's because the way I think my deck gets around the tutor problem is just like there's like 72 different types of ramp in Magic, right? So like I don't need to tutor for ramp. I just like will draw a Harrow or like a rampant growth or something, right? And I'll draw enough of it that I can kind of get it all out. And I just need like one or two enabler cards to really send it off.
Yeah.
Which I think it's super fun. But I also think that so I think the weakness of the Yuriko deck is like if you can stall it, or your Yuriko deck is if you can stall it out, then you can kind of like stabilize, right? And it makes it a little bit harder for it to kind of push through and win. Whereas the weakness of the AC deck is that it is a mid to late game deck in a format where like the competitive decks, there's no such thing as a mid to late game, right? Like a CEDH deck I think wins like on turn like 4, right? Like pretty typically.
Yeah, this was something that I think is really different about Commander these days. One of the things that I like about Yuriko is that it is a quick kill. It's why we played 3 games, right? First game I played Stella, second game I played Feather, third game I played Yuriko. That Yuriko game was like maybe half as long as the others because Yuriko ends games, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think it feels unfair. I bet if I were to like poll all of our friends, all of them would say they fucking hate Yuriko, and that's kind of fair enough. But one of the things that it feels unfair because Yuriko drives a lot of games to completion just by hitting the board for massive amounts of damage. But that actually does kind of get to a good spot, especially when you played 3 Commander games and the 2-hour game is just not what you're here for. You want someone to close out. You want somebody to kind of win. And even if Yuriko can't get you to that point, like the game that we played where I played Yuriko and Josh was playing that one of the Doctor Who decks. This was at your house a couple of months ago.
Yuriko, that was the game I played. Augustin, right? So Augustin was stalling out Yuriko,
yeah,
and then that game let Josh drop his 1 card win, but that's okay because it's like a 7 mana card, right? Like it is a late enough game card that you don't feel bad about that card winning. Which is I think you're right. I think Yuriko feels unfair because it's playing a fundamentally different game than most Commander decks are playing, right? Or rather than most kind of decks in that range are playing, right? Like I feel like most 1 to 3 level decks are playing for like the mid game, like are playing battle cruisery. And
this is the thing that feels so unfair about Yuriko. Yuriko, the deck comes in and you're attacking on turns 1 and 2, which is wild. Nobody does that, right? In most Commander games, your first 3 or 4 turns are just setting up. You're playing an enchantment. You're playing your ramp. Okay, you're searching for whatever. You're playing like lands that come in untapped or they come in tapped or whatever. And it's like Yuriko is hitting faces for 5 damage, triggers or something on turn 3, and everyone's like, "What the fuck? Where did this kind of like come from?" Right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think feels like that's the big kind of feels bad about Yuriko.
And I think on top of that too is that like it's because it's so based around evasion stuff, it's not super interactable, right? Like you have to have removal, and I think that like even like the lower power decks run removal, but they don't run it at the density that you can be guaranteed to have it in the way that like the more competitive deck would have it. And I think it's that 1-2 punch. It's like, all right, buddy dropped his one drop undroppable or unblockable, and somebody has to have an answer for it. And also like just Commander Ninjutsu evades a lot of the normal stuff, right? So just by matter of example, the part of the reason we played this game is both Josh and I built a new deck. I built an Ian Malcolm deck, which is meant to just be Chaos Incarnate, right? And I dropped in this last game I dropped Possibility Storm, which we quickly turn to call
That's
spinning the wheel,
card.
right? Possibility Storm says that whenever you cast a spell out of your hand, instead of casting that spell, roll through your deck until you find a card that matches the type of that card and cast that spell for free instead, right? And so it really fucks with everybody's game plan, right? Like it's fun, but Eureka, because ninjutsu isn't an alternate casting cost, it's a activated ability. It evades this thing, and so
and because the nature of the Eureka deck is I have a ton of 1-drops. And so, like, for instance, the very first trigger of Possibility, Storm, I think was me. I dropped a 1-drop and I flipped cards from the top of my library until I found literally the strongest creature in my deck, which is not that strong. She's a 5/4 for 6 mana. But technically speaking, Possibility Storm gave me 5 free mana, right? And it's just like that's kind of the thing that that Possibility Storms does that's interesting. This is part of why Augustin fucked me over so hard, because Augustin says the opposite of that. Augustin says for every spell you cast, you pay 1 more, basically. Your opponents pay 1 more on each of their spells. And so when I was playing Eureka, I was like, oh, this fucks me, because my whole thing is about playing super cheap spells, and now I have this 1 mana attack. If I'm playing 1 spell per turn, Augustin is not so bad, but Eureka is paying like 3 spells per turn, and each one of those is now paying kind of the 1 mana attack, so that's pretty brutal. But anyway, you were saying about Possibility Storm.
In the chat, friend Josh says you dick. But the point there was that, and like even with Augustin, right? Like you could get your Rico out because ninjutsu evades that, right? Like you have to pay on the top end, but like it's not like you have to pay a tax on top of that, right? Like, and the way this would usually be is like you kill your Rico, but you're not paying the commander tax on top of it. In fact, if I were trying to rewrite Eureka, right, I'd have ninjutsu also pay the commander tax, right? Like as a way to make it better for more casual games. I don't expect Wizards to do that, right? It's just kind of like as a first pass as to how to fix that problem. That's how I would do it. Is have ninjutsu pay the commander tax.
Sure.
And I think that's part of why it can feel unfair, right? Is there's not a really good way. It feels kind of solitary, if that makes sense, right?
It's the difference between that and Feather, right? So the other deck I played in the second game was Feather, which I did end up winning. The Feather deck, Feather is the cornerstone of the deck. The whole deck revolves around the engine that is in the command zone. You're playing a bunch of 1 mana instants and sorceries, and when you have Feather on the field, when you cast those instant and sorceries, they come back to your hand. So that's your card advantage. You don't have any draw in the deck except for all of these 1 mana cantrips that you're continuing to cycle over and over and over again. I've never won with the Feather deck except for that game, and I won that game for a completely different card than Feather, right? But in the Feather decks, in the Feather games that I've lost, the brutal one was also at your house, also against Augustin, where Feather got removed 4 times, and I was paying this insane tax. And it's just like, now at this point, I'm paying 7 or 8 mana to get my 3-drop that the whole deck revolves around back on the field. That's brutal, right? And part of that is I think I actually played that game wrong. One of the big differences between that game and this game is I was always thinking get Feather out as quickly as possible so that you can you get Feather out as quickly as possible so that you can just kind of immediately go to work on her. But I actually think the correct answer is actually kind of leave Feather in the command zone until you can really take sort of advantage. You have a couple more turns of setup than just attack on turn 3 kind of thing. And yeah, I definitely think that the presence or absence of command attacks makes a pretty big difference, I would say, to the power level of those 2 different decks.
Yeah, I think it makes a difference, the power level of any of the decks, right? I guess Frank was running the other commander that doesn't pay commander tax. How I actually don't know how that card.
Gorethi is he's just white, blue, green. comes into the battlefield is is a flyer. When Dorethi enters or attacks, he taps or untaps a permanent. And then the other thing about Dorethi is you can pay as an activated ability a white, a blue, and a green to pull him out of the command zone. So he will only ever pay 1 mana of commander tax for the rest of the game, because as soon as you kill him once, he goes back in the command zone. You're just paying 4 instead of paying 3, which is not that bad, right? But Dorethi is also just not as good on its face as like coming into a battle and tapping something is just like way less good than the Eureka deck stacking up 6 triggers or something and then just like ripping for 10 damage off the tap, right? Like that's how I won that game, right? I got 5 triggers and I needed to hit 6 damage, and it's like that you can't break Dorethi to sort of that point, I would say.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Do you know what the other like big CEDH commanders are?
Yeah, I know some of them are. There's Wyona, maybe. There's one. It's like a weird human tribal deck. Whenever she attacks you, you look at the top 6 and you drop. I think it's either a non-human or a human, something like that, onto the battlefield. So it's a pretty powerful one. There is Joda, Wida. There's a blue. God, or like he's something Bonder prodigy, like Kinnan. He's the third of the. So there are 4 commanders that are just commanders on the Game Changers list. One is Yuriko, one is Augustin, one is Wynoda, whatever her name was, and the other is Kinnan, I think, Bonder prodigy. Kinnan says whenever you tap for mana, you create 1 extra mana of any color that permanent could produce, and that goes infinite with basically a million things, so he just combos off immediately. There's a couple of other CDH sort of like staple commanders. Almost all of them are in blue because counter magic is pretty insane for CEDH, how to make kind of CEDH sort of hum. But CEDH decks are also a little weird. For instance, Josh in the chat says Krenko. To my understanding, Krenko is not a CE. Almost no CEDH decks are built around creature combat of any sort of kind or variety. It's just kind of not a powerful sort of line of attack for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of like Thassa's or like Thess. I don't think Thassa's Oracle is the commander, but like there's a lot of decks that are like built around doing one of the like emptying your deck and using one of the if your deck is empty you win cards, which is like Thassa's Oracle and I believe one of the Jaces.
Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, I want to say. Yeah. Because what you do is you make an sort of engine. You draw your whole deck, and then you draw down to the last card, play Thassa's Oracle, and that wins you the game on the spot, basically.
Yeah. No, which they all feel very kind of like assembling, or at least all the ones that I've seen. I'm not going to pretend that like I follow CEDH super closely, but they're all kind of like assemble Exodia and then like execute on your own with like not as much interaction with other people, which is I think the thing that makes CEH feel kind of like meh, if that makes sense, right? Like to your point, there's a lot of blue because all the interaction is on like counter spells to keep things from happening, rather than on kind of like quote unquote traditional magic, which is like based around the combat phase. If that makes sense.
Yeah, there's also a couple of other. I'm actually just like looking up some of this now. So it is Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. Another one is Magda, Brazen Outlaw. Magda is the dwarf commander that we were talking about. I actually didn't know she was up here, but she has a tutor effect, right? Where you sacrifice 5 treasures and you search your library for an artifact or a dragon. My understanding with Magda is it's just kind of all about pulling crazy shit out of your deck. There's a couple of other there's a couple of other ones like Kenrith, the Returned Hero is a big one. He just has Kenrith as target player draws a card on his body, so he is an amazing mana sink. If you can generate infinite mana, you win the game with with Kenrith on the spot because you make each other player draw their decks just in order, basically. And then there's also a couple of like partner commander stuff that also happens. So there's a couple of commanders called Thrasios and Timna the Weaver. These partner commanders get you into blue, green, white, and black. Thrasios is also a great infinite mana dump. You know, he reveals cards from the top of your library. You can put lands into play, other cards into your hand for four generic mana. You just need to generate colorless mana, and you can draw your whole deck off of Thrasios. And then, you know, there's just like a bunch of other sort of stuff that you can do. So
That makes sense. Yeah. What was I gonna say? So part of this is kind of unwind a little bit is like, you know, I feel like part of the prohibition of the kind of like game changers list, like, or like the thing about like mass land denial isn't so much that mass land denial is super powerful on its own, because it usually hits you too. It's just kind of annoying and like that, like, you know, resets the game, if that makes sense. That feels like that felt like a weird thing to me. Do you have thoughts on that? Like a weird kind of like not quite in the right place, or mass land removal felt like a weird inclusion on the list to me as like a class of card. In terms of power,
I actually would not say it's
Okay.
all that weird, mostly because it feels. Are you saying in the sense of feels bad does not equal sort of like power?
Yeah, feels bad does not equal like, yeah, does not equal game winner, right? Like,
Okay, I definitely think that's kind of why it's. So there's two versions of this. There is do you know about a card called Upheaval? Have you ever heard of Upheaval?
no.
So before there was a banned list, there was a card called Upheaval. This is a card from Odyssey, or maybe it was part of the. I mean, we weren't really respecting the banned list back then, but it was a card that was used against me when I was in college. Upheaval says return all permanents to their owner's hands. Okay, so the way that Upheaval works, it's all permanents, including lands. So it is essentially land disruption. But the thing that you do with Upheaval is you say, okay, I tap all my lands and all my mana rocks, and I float a ton of mana, and then I cast Upheaval. Everybody else is now reset to 0. I replay all of my mana rocks, and if I have 4 or 5 or something, right now I have 5 mana, and then I smack a big creature onto the board, right? You know, I tap all of this stuff to generate enough mana to play my mana rocks, and then I also drop a 7/7 or something, and nobody can respond to that for 3 turns. That's the game-winning kind of like land removal. It's sort of a little bit of what Josh is doing with that suspend deck, right? You know, the suspend deck, you cast Worldfire to set everybody to 1 while you have a big creature suspended, and then it comes into play. Nobody's going to be able to respond to that shit. It's just going to immediately kind of like run over you, basically. I think that's like the profession. If I'm a pro player, that's how I'm using land removal. But the thing is, I think it is probably a feels bad thing, because resetting the game to 0, I think, makes for bad games of Commander. This is a little bit of what I mean when I say that Yuriko is a good commander, but like Yuriko feels bad, but it's actually a good commander for the game because she ends games.
Right.
She kills you. Mass Land Disruption does not kill you.
Right.
And so that's the part of it on the second, you know, on it being on that second tier of EDH that's, you know, different, interesting.
Yep. No, that makes total sense to me. You have any strong thoughts about like the power level system?
There's a couple of things in there that I think are pretty interesting. One of them is extra turns. I am actually probably going to increase the value of my the sort of, I'm probably going to drive my Stella Lee deck in the 3 range into the 3 range somewhere, because I think that deck takes a lot of I'm sorry, just to explain for the chat, Stella Lee has this ability, incredibly powerful, tap to copy an instant or a sorcery spell. Okay, cool, very awesome, right? But you have to cast, it has to be your 3rd spell on the turn. You have to cast 2 additional spells, which is not the easiest thing in the world, right? So you go 1 drop, bam, big spell kind of thing. And I think the way that I was sort of failing with that deck was I didn't have good payoffs for it. And I think actually the best payoff is probably extra turn spells. I think the way that you really want to run Stella is you run a bunch of 1 drop things, and then you have like a time warp in your hand, and then you just copy the shit out of your time warp so that you get like 2 or 3 extra turns kind of thing. That's how you win the game. That chaining extra turns is something that puts you on kind of like the game changers kind of list. And theoretically, maybe that's how Stella works. Stella is also a combo commander. I don't know how into CEDH she gets, but Stella goes infinite with any untapped spell. If you have a spell that says untap target creature, Stella just taps to target, so you just copy that spell. You can cast infinite spells. So if you have a trigger for something like that, you then your third piece wins you the game, whatever it is, gutter snipe or something like that. Just deals infinite damage to everybody on the board at instant speed, which is pretty good, pretty strong.
Yeah, that absolutely. No, I was more talking about if you thought that the system was doing its job well, given that it's like still in beta. And we're like,
Yeah. I think there are more cards that ought to be on the game changers list, and I also, if it were me personally, I would also deal with the list a little bit differently. But yeah, I guess that's really kind
well,
of it. The thing I like about the list is it defines pretty strong kind of play patterns, right? No two card combos is actually, fair enough. I think combos are simultaneously like good and also unfun. They're a little bit like Eureka. They end the game, which sucks. But like but they're very linear, which is bad. When your whole deck is around setting up a 3-card combo, this tends to be, it is not that the combo itself is bad, it's that the intervening parts I think are actually pretty bad for the game overall. So your tutoring for the combo piece that'll win you the game, basically.
yeah, I think part of this too is that like it's bad for more casual games because it's a thing that you can't anticipate if you don't know what the deck is, right? Like,
Yep.
at a competitive level, you're like, oh, you're running this, you're searching for this. And so I know what piece I need to stop from happening, right? Like, I need to, even at like, like a high 3, low 4 point, you can be like, oh, you're going to tutor for your last piece, so I need to stop the tutor. Or like, you're going, like, that is one of the pieces of your assembled Exodia, right? And so I need to stop it. Whereas if you're playing a more casual format, unless you're playing with the same group a lot, right? Like you're not necessarily going to be like, you're going to be like, oh, that's an interesting card. What does it do? And then the next turn you win, right? Like, you don't necessarily see what the enabling pieces are. And I think that's also what kind of like, Liz kind of like, where my casual format has been taken over by tryhards type thing. Cause like if you're running,
Yeah, it's also
go on.
it's also the kind of thing where losing to the same combo every time sucks. The combos are fun to lose against once because you get into that, you're riding the roller coaster. Somebody goes, okay, I'm going to play this, and you go, all right, okay, that's interesting. So something that would be similar to this is Josh could have taken infinite extra turns if he had played his deck right. I kind of pointed this out on sort of Saturday. He was capable of generating 5 treasures per turn, but it required some hoops to jump through. It was not super clean, but like there's a card. The card says tap, sacrifice 5 artifacts. Take an extra turn after this one. Obviously, when you take an extra turn, you untap, so you can untap the artifact. So if he just keeps generating 5 treasures a turn, he's good. And he could have done that. He was in a position to generate that many. He was in a position to generate that many treasures if he had sort of like gamed it out. But like it was a very sort of like finicky thing. That's fun and engaging, even though I would have lost to it. I wanted to point that out because I was like, this is a really neat, essentially infinite combo, right? It was pretty, people like watching something that is janky, get assembled kind of like that, right? It is putting together the dominoes and then letting them fall kind of thing.
Well,
But
is it
when
called
it's
like Magic Christmas Tree World, right? Is what they call like like your 7-piece combo that's never actually going to happen, but like it's fun in theory.
Yes, exactly. But like when someone plays, when somebody beats you for the 3rd time with the same sort of combo. Oh, I can't even think about it. What the combo would be. Maybe Stella would be a good example of this. I play Stella. I have a 1-mana blue spell that says untap target creature. I copy that spell infinite times. Gutter Snipe is on the board. You guys are all dead. It's like, who cares? That's the 4th time you do that, it is not fun. It's not interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And the only thing I was going to add on, but before is that like traditional combat winning decks at least kind of have like the haste problem, right? It's like like, oh, you generally have at least a round before the thing that's going to kill you can kill you. And if you don't draw a response, you can be like, oh, well, I didn't do the right thing. But it feels worse when it's kind of like, well, I didn't anticipate like, a 7 drop that could maul me to death immediately. So I guess I'm
Yeah, something
That's a model.
similar. I think played out a little bit with us with Feather and AC in the second game, where that was a pretty fair game between sort of the two of us, where we were sort of racing each other. And I had this thing of I can generate infinite chump blockers, essentially, right?
Right.
Um, but but like the second that you drew anything that was like all my boys get trample or something like that, or you had a good way to sort of remove the combo piece, the thing that was generating my trump blocker tokens, right? Like if there was a good way to sort of remove that piece of the equation, I was sort of out of luck. And that's what makes for a good commander game, because what's happening there is the two of us have two powerful engines that are both sort of racing towards the finish line, and we are searching for enough disruptive interaction in order to see kind of like who wins out, right? And the answer was I had the kill with Gutter Snipe, because I eventually drew and played Gutter Snipe, and then Gutter Snipe does 2 damage whenever you cast a spell, and so I had a bunch of cheap spells, and that was the thing that was able to sort of like get me over the top kind of thing. But I would say like that took place over the course of like 5 turns. That's like a
Yeah.
fun. You are facing off against somebody, you're dealing with kind of everybody, but it's really the two of you who are sort of like racing for a finish line. Eventually that one person kind of wins. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um that doesn't happen with kind of solitary-ish sort of decks. And if you're playing a deck that just kind of assembles the combo and then wins, that's when you're getting into this kind of linear play. The game plays out the same every time. You're just sort of like diddling with your guys. You're taking, yeah, you're just taking the same actions to win every sort of game. I don't know.
Yeah. That sounds about right to me.
But also at the same time, I do think that creatures. The problem with battle cruiser decks is people. Then it just becomes who builds the biggest battle cruiser,
Yeah.
and that person, like that person wins.
Yeah, no, I'm the when I debuted AC a couple of years ago at PAX, right? Like I wasn't like I hadn't been playing Magic enough to really like know how to play it. It was just kind of like I was stacking stuff on the table and like swinging, and then like I finally started swinging at people, and that ended the game. But like that was like, um, but it's like I built the biggest battle cruiser, but I was able to run roughshod over everybody, and that's that, right? Like that's
Yeah.
which can be fun in its own right, but like at some level, it's not like in the same way that Eureka is good because it ends games. Those types of games can just like kind of draw out, even if you know who's probably going to win, because it takes a couple turns to like knock people down, and you get into big block puzzle type things, where somebody's like maybe hoping to draw like their board wipe to to reset the game state to a point where they can recover from, and um, that can feel just as kind of arduous if you're sitting at the table for 3 hours, trying to resolve, three people with 10 life left, but like a fresh board state because somebody drew their supreme verdict or whatever, right?
Yeah. I have definitely been in that kind of situation a lot of times, where when you have overly kind of overly board wipey, overly controlling decks, where you have one deck that is too sort of it's just too it doesn't win the game, it just stops everybody else from winning the game. Those suck. It's like, okay, for the 4th turn in a row, there is a huge board wipe that has just gone out and everybody's rebuilding from zero. It's like, man, there's like no way to recover from games like that. They tend to really blow.
That's which is why I don't play Augustin super well, because that is like the entire point of that deck, right? Like
Yeah.
not only does it blow, but it also doesn't really have its own win condition. It just like slows down the board state, which that's that's mostly because I enjoy being a dick sometimes, and so I keep that hidden in a different box. I only bring it out a couple times.
Yeah, it's funny that Eureka is my favorite deck. I think the thing that I like to, there are some decks where there are some people who like to take game actions, and I think that probably describes me pretty well, but that tends to be controlling decks, and what I tend to describe are controlling decks. So I actually think a lot of the decks that I have kind of have this sort of danger, where a lot of what I'm doing is just control deck bullshit, where it's just dirtily I'm taking 1,000 game actions and then not winning. That's kind of what happened to me with Stella in the game say in the game against Josh, we were staring down lethal, and I was able to generate like 25 mana and draw a ton of cards, and I wasn't able to close out the game because that deck took a lot of game actions, but it didn't have a lot of kind of like oomph, and it wasn't able to sort of make a real sort of impact. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, we're at like 40 minutes. I don't know if I've got any further thoughts.
How do you feel like your chaos deck played? Were you happy with it?
I was absolutely like it is not a deck that is designed to win. It is designed to cause chaos, and it did that. It did that in both games that it ran. It's so I tried to explain this to everybody at the game table. No one had played Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, there is a faction that is purple colored that invades, but it can fight either the invaders or the main player. It's just kind of like a third actor, and that's how I feel like this deck works. It's kind of group huggy, but it's also kind of like anti-group huggy, right? Like it's, like sometimes you'll get good things out of it. Sometimes they'll just make the other two opponents miserable, so you won't push on it too hard, and it's not really a threat in its own right. And that was just the mood I was going for with it, and I just had a ton of fun with it. So I'm super happy with the way that deck turned out. I don't think it would survive in anything more, like even a little bit more serious. Like if it was like the third or fourth deck in like an AC Yuriko Showdown, I don't think it sticks around super long because there's like a lot of free attacks, and then it just soaks up tons of damage probably. Yeah, and that's the problem, right? Like the reason it worked is because no one could be bothered to remove Ian Malcolm except when it got like really annoying, right? Like
I actually think it is correct to target Ian Malcolm pretty hard if you are the winning player. This was my play on no, it wasn't. I was playing Feather. I was playing Stella. In Stella, I killed Ian Malcolm on purpose, and it was because I was the winning player, or I felt like I was the player with initiative, and I had this thought in my head, which was when you are in the driver's seat, you don't want somebody. You don't want chaos. Yeah. Variance is good when you're behind because it can catapult you into first place out of nowhere, right? But once I realized that I was in the driver's seat, I really had to I had powerful turns coming up and I wanted to do powerful things with them. That was when I was like, I have to kill Ian Malcolm now because otherwise he will disrupt my game-winning plays rather than turn my bad plays rather than give me huge comeback plays, basically. Kind of the way that I framed it.
I think that's absolutely correct. And I think the part of the reason just is that people are trying to draw their answers, and Ian Malcolm lets you draw everybody else's answers for you, right? Like all the answers that you have in your deck can be used against you, right? If you're in the controlling player seat, it's like, oh, my board wipe, which I just wouldn't play if I drew it, potentially goes under Ian Malcolm, and any of the other three players can then play it, right? Like if Josh, who I believe was mana screwed that game, right, just like didn't draw, or maybe that was a different game, but like if somebody who's mana screwed draws their board wipe and can't play it, that's like that's slightly more likely to happen because everybody's doing their own thing. Whereas like if one person has the resources to do it, Ian Malcolm leaves it out for somebody to do, and everybody will be like, okay, I can handle that, right? Just like you two cover me while I take out the leader, right? Which is, I think, the other big part of Commander is table politics, right? Like, which doesn't happen in CEDH, but that's
one of the parts that I really love about Commander. The thing I thought was very interesting is I was the bad guy all three games, which I guess makes sense because I did win two of them, and I guess I came in second on the third one. But it was funny to me. I felt like I was behind when I was playing Feather, but Frank very clearly thought I was ahead because he was defending you from me, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, so the thing is that part of that is that I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to kill you, right? Like, maybe the right decision for me would have been to like attack Frank or Josh to like pull out like a side win or something. But you had this engine that I couldn't get past. Whereas you had enough like side effects to like to start hitting everybody. I think that's where the perception of
Also, yeah,
danger
this
came
is the
from.
other thing.
Also, you having to draw
Not that
Smothering Tithe, right? Like that was the big thing,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. I said to John, I was like that. You know, both that and Yuriko, I think were games that I won because I drew incredibly good cards for my deck. For Yuriko, it was the Biden of Thassa.
Right.
The
Yeah.
Biden of Thassa. The thing that kills Yuriko is turn 5, turn 6. Everybody has a big board of blockers, and I have already done my ninja tricks. My ninjas are on the field, but they're no longer evasive. And if I attack them into anything, people just kill them with their 2, you know, somebody blocks my 2/2 with a 4/4 and all my ninjas are now dead and I'm owned kind of thing. But what Thassa lets you do is tap down an entire player's board by forcing them to attack, and then you can swing with the team and get 6 Eureka triggers, which was how I closed out that game. And Smothering Tithe was the same sort of thing in the Feather deck. Smothering Tithe essentially meant I had infinite mana, and I actually think if I had been playing it better, but it would have been more annoying, I would have there were I was trying to figure out how I valued this. I had cards in my hand that was tap 1 red mana, draw a card, essentially, right? I think I should have been playing my Smothering Tithe down to 0 every turn in order to just fill my hand, right? That would probably have been the correct way to play that if I were in sort of like a mathematically perfect kind of setting. But it would have been sort of annoying to constantly be interrupting everybody's turns and then taking these huge game actions at the end of everybody's end step. And then also, I think I would have continued to do that path thing that I was doing a lot of. I did that for 1 rotation at the table, and I was like, this is so fucking annoying. I can't keep doing this. But I think technically speaking, if I had played that game back and I played it perfectly, I would have pathed those tokens every single turn for as long as I possibly
Sure.
could have, because then I would have literally pulled every basic out of my deck by like the 3rd rotation or something like that. So I definitely feel like those wins were buoyed, I guess I would say, by playing incredibly good cards or just getting the chance to play my incredibly good cards.
Yeah.
But anyway, the thing that I was thinking about is I cracked there's a lot of aggro that goes to the player who 2 things. There's a lot of aggro that goes to the player who cracks the sort of binding oath of we're all just playing ramp, right? We're all just assembling. Like I always feel like I'm attacking first, right? Which I think generates a ton of aggro. Essentially, everybody on the table kind of looks at you. And then the other thing is that
Well, I want to say that it has to be with something that's meaningful, because I believe in the first game I was the first to attack and I swung Malcolm at somebody for 2, right? But like that doesn't do anything.
Oh, yeah.
It just kind of like hits for 2, and so nobody was like, okay, fine, whatever, right? Like, you know, like you were actually assembling an
I also think that the kinds of things like, so for instance, I was thinking of myself, I was thinking of AC as being ahead. I was thinking of Feather as being behind, and I was only surviving by sort of the crazy coincidence that I had this chump blocker engine where I could just generate 1/1s to tank it for me kind of thing, right? And that was like a pretty fragile game state. It's like if that Crow and Crusader ever goes away, I'm fucked. If like I just felt like I was so close to getting just run over. And part of it is that I think of AC and I think of lands as very important. If somebody is ramping a lot, I think that's a very dangerous state. That person is probably getting ahead. AC taking a turn that is I ramp and then I ramp and I adds 4 lands to the battlefields and draw 4 cards. That's insane value. But I actually don't think that reads quite the same way as the game actions I was taking on Feather. When I'm casting a lot of spells and doing a lot of combat tricks, and I had a couple of blowout turns where it was like you had the fog. That was a game-winning turn, but you fogged me, and it was like fuck. You know, I thought I lost the game on that fog, and I think that stuff looks. I think people don't see I'm putting a lot of lands on the field and drawing a lot of cards as like game winners. They see I attack with a lot of things and then I play a bunch of spells that make them all 20/20s, right? That's the stuff that makes them sort of see the aggro. And I bet I generated a lot from Josh and from Frank for that reason.
Yeah, no, and I think part of it too is that like putting a lot of lands on the field doesn't feel dangerous. It's when you use those lands to play creatures that it feels dangerous, and you still get a chance to react to that because the big creatures probably don't have haste, that kind of thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
Even if you are
I
correct,
also
it's like you should be seeing that setup phase as being like, that's the danger zone, right? You need to stop him before he drops the big monsters. It just doesn't read that way.
Yeah, it almost reads like I'm playing the bully. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like he's just trying to put lands on the field. What are you doing? You know what I mean? And I'm sitting there, I attack you for 6. Like kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that I don't know. I've obviously been playing Magic for a long time, or like that's actually probably a Hearthstone instinct of all things, because in Hearthstone it's different in 1v1 format. But one of my things in Hearthstone is that like there are those games where you feel like you have to close out or else you lose. That's sort of how I felt. And that's really what I'm describing when I'm saying like I felt like AC was ahead. It's not that AC was ahead on the board. It's that I had tempo, but I didn't have value.
Right.
And if we were playing a value game, I was going to fucking lose. I had to find the win.
Yeah, it's
so yeah.
I think part of it too is that like because your deck is doing so many things, it's winning over a number of turns, right? Like basically what would have happened if I had one is probably I would have found like some answer to like temporary clear you and swung in with like 40 damage worth of like fat creatures, right? And
yeah,
and that feels less weird because it's like oh, it's it's a bunch of attack damage, right? Whereas you were like
I actually think if you had countered my Akroan Crusader instead of Mavinda, you might have won also.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because I actually thought it was correct to counter Mavinda because I was doing something very powerful with Mavinda, which was using my graveyard as a second hand, basically. I didn't have something that gave me maximum hand size, and so I was discarding out frankly some of my most important spells because I was counting on Mavinda to pull them out of the graveyard for me. And when you countered Mavinda, I actually lost that engine, which was pretty bad. I ended up losing a couple of incredible, like I had one that was a +3/+3. If I had had that, I think I would have won a turn or two sooner actually, but I just didn't have a good way to buff my creatures for a while. So I had to just like dirtle around the table until I got another buff spell kind of thing. So yeah, it's one of those, I think you made the correct decision at the time based on sort of how that game was going, but probably if you had countered the Crone Crusader, I would have lost because I wouldn't be able to generate the chump blockers and you would have just run over me with fat fucking
Yeah, no,
sea serpents.
I think that the part of that was that like I also like didn't because it's a more casual format. I wasn't like thinking through all the things as much as like I guess I kind of got caught by being chump blocked a couple times, right? It's like, oh, you can do that. I should have dealt with that instead of like the thing that I did, which is kind of swing at you with big boys, right? The other thing too is that like I was holding Rampaging Balos. Like I had drawn Rampaging Balos like a turn or two before the game ended, and that was like that's the one where like landfall like generates a 4/4, like and so it's like I could have generated an army of 4/4s that could have like run over the
yeah. But I probably would have lost that race, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but like but it was like right at the right time where you like had like had the
yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying, right? Before it was the gutter snipe that won me. Part of it is that I was able to draw like this is really at the end of the day what it was, like having a number of really strong threats. And when you have more threats than your opponent has removal, you tend to win, kind of thing. It's like because there are also games where I play on Feather where you just never draw any of your kind of enablers like gutter snipe or whatever else. That was a little bit of what was happening to me with or you never draw any of the spells. That's what happened to me on Stella. On Stella, I had a lot of enablers, but I actually didn't have almost any of my cheap spellslinger spells, so I wasn't able to trigger them that much. Which is how we got into the position where I generated a gazillion mana and all the rest of it couldn't actually close out because I just kind of got gummed up with the stuff that triggers based off of the things, but without actually, the things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right. Anything else you want to talk about Commander before we get into this back half?
I think we hit it. What's your next Commander deck? Do you have another one that you're looking to make?
I'm pretty happy with what I've got for the moment, right? Like I've got a couple of unopened Outlaw Thunder Junction, one of which might be whatever Stella Blade.
Yeah.
But the one I accidentally bought Stella. I had meant to buy the I think it's like a red, blue, black one that I haven't opened yet. It's still sitting in the back, so I might just pull that out at some point. But I like AC is kind of like my, if I want to like play power. Malcolm is funsies. Augustine is the forbidden.
Dave is playing the Dave deck.
deck. Um, but I love my Sauron deck, right? Like I think it hits like the right level of kind of like cute and fun, but like not so powerful that it runs over people type of deal, right? It's one of those decks that like if like let's say you're playing Eureka, right? Because this kind of happened one of the times that when we played at your place
Yep.
that one time. It's like I can probably stop one person from winning. I don't necessarily win, but I can stop a person from winning, right? Like, and that can be its own joy. And like the Sauron deck is full of all of like kind of like the silly things I like to do, and so I don't like. There's a part of me that wants to build a Spellslinger deck, but not not enough that I want to like spend the money on it type of deal, right? Like it's like I have to go through the theory crafting, right? The thing that works about the Ian Malcolm deck is I just I just picked a bunch of dumb cards and threw them in a box, and it worked well enough, right? Like
Yeah, the Spellslinger deck, you have to have a good number. The Spellslinger deck is really interesting. You have to have a good amount of the, what would I call, sort of the core of the deck, and a good amount of the enablers. And getting that ratio right, I think, is actually kind of hard. This is something I also struggled early. Early Eureka won games because I, to be honest, wasn't playing against players who had super strong decks, but I had a lot of issues with the early days of the Eureka deck because my ratio of unblockable cheap dummies and ninjas was wrong. I sort of had too many ninjas and not enough unblockable cheap dummies. And only now do I feel like I actually have a good number of sort of like the unblockable side that enables kind of like the ninja side. And I feel like for Spellslingers, you have to have the gutter snipes and the, preordains, right, in order to make that deck work.
yeah, no, the way I would want to do it is with Niv Mizzet, which I believe is like draw one, deal a damage type of deal.
Yeah, sure.
And like that could be fun, but also like not enough fun that I want to build it, right? Like if I build another deck, it's probably going to be something like I found a stupid win condition and I want to like target that win condition, right? And it'd probably have to be of a commander to be like compelling enough to work. Like I wasn't really planning on building a deck, but then I saw Ian Malcolm on like a meme post somewhere, right? And I was like, that's a stupid commander. I want to play it, right? Like, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I feel you.
So maybe, and like, maybe at some level I'd want to run like some color combination that I don't typically run, like maybe a vampire tribal or maybe like a pirates deck or something, right? But Josh Shorty is running a pirates deck.
What would it be like? I don't know. What are your favorite colors? It's got to be blue.
Yeah, my favorite colors is like it rotates, but like blue paired with something. Like I enjoy blue white for like the Azoriousness. I enjoy blue black sometimes for like the dumb stuff. I enjoy blue green for red. That's actually a thing that I considered doing. Is there was a like maybe 2 or 3 years ago I was playing Arena and there's like an enchantment that if you put enough counters on it, you win the game. And so I was running a what's the mechanic where you proliferate? I was running a proliferate deck, and usually it won by. Actually, I don't think I ever won with the number of counters. I won because I proliferated a bunch of counters on a giant creature and I hit someone in the face with it, right? Like, so there's maybe a version of things where I'd run a proliferate style deck, but like, I don't know. I already have AC, right? Like, what do I need another blue green stompy deck for? There's also part of me that wants to run like something very stupid. Like there's a blue creature, it's called like Magisters of something. It's like tap 4 of these, and your target opponent mills 15 cards, and you can have unlimited number of them in your deck. And so,
man, I've always wanted to make one of those decks.
Yeah,
the ones that I wanted to do was Dragon's Approach, I think, but like it's so expensive because you have to have like 35 of them in your deck. I don't remember what Dragon's Approach. What does Dragon's Approach do? Dragon's Approach deals 3 damage to each opponent, and then you may exile it and 4 cards named Dragon's Approach to search your library for a dragon and put it onto the field. And you can have any number of them. That sounds awesome. You just fire, and then boom, big stompy boy, and I attack. Like that sounds like a great time for that. Another one that I was thinking about is there's Apostles, which is you can have any number of them, and then you can sacrifice. It's like a black, and you sacrifice 5 apostles, and you can go search your library for a demon. So it's like the demon, the apostles do their occult ritual and summon the demon. It's like that kind of stuff. I would be super into. Yeah. So I don't know what the one that you is it one from Arena? I remember you had a what like Laboratory Maniac or something. That's the one where you draw your whole deck, I think.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find this real quick. There's a gatherer string for this. Persistent Petitioners. It's a what?
Persistent Petitioners.
Tap 4 untapped advisors you control. Target player mills 12 cards. A deck can have any number of cards named Persistent Petitioners. This would be very stupid and wouldn't work very well. But like I had a deck on Arena that used it. But I guess if it's an advisors, I could actually like build a real deck around this. So maybe there's a thing for me to do in there. I just need to find an appropriate commander for it. Okay, now you've got me interested, right? Like,
well, okay.
Yeah, it's probably like 7 cents a card too. Like I just buy like 80 of them, throw them on the. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna find an advisor commander, and then like run.
What if I told you that you already have one?
Oh, is Augustin an advisor?
Grand Augustin, I'm pretty sure it's a human advisor. Yeah.
Oh man.
Okay.
Now I actually want to build this stupid deck, right? Like, it's just like Augustin just stalls things out. It's just like I play a Persistent Petitioners, right? Like
I mill you for 15. Right. You can do some powerful stuff. There's a couple of there's a new card that just came out in Aether Drift. It's an enchantment. It's a blue enchantment, and I think it is you untap your non-land permanents on each opponent's untap step, because then you could do it where you tap down all your petitioners, mill you for 15. Next player goes tap down all your petitioners again, and you just like nuke the whole game.
Yeah. No. I feel like there might be like a room from Mysteries at Karloff that does something like that too. But I'll look through my cards because that's too much of a game plan for the things that I like, right? Like I like kind of like assembling weirdness, but it is what it is. But we've hit the hour mark, so let's go into our week's then.
Yeah, well, so there was something you want to talk about in the back half that we were talking about.
Well, I've got 2 things. First thing I want to talk about is the Monster Hunter Wild story, because I finally finished the post-credits story. And I just want to describe this to you. So, spoiler warning for the Monster Hunter Wild story. I believe I said on the podcast previously that the story was described to me as good for a Monster Hunter game, which, maybe I buy. But I just want to describe to you how kind of psychotic this story is, right? So, The opening of the story is this small boy gets like chased out of his home by a monster, right? It's Monster Hunter. And he walks himself like across the desert, and he gets rescued by, the guild, right? The Monster Hunter Guild is like described as being in the West, and they're like, we thought there was nobody beyond the desert, and clearly there's this boy, right? And so you go on an adventure to find his people, right? And obviously there are people out there, so we want to make contact, that type of thing, right? And so you go through the whole Monster Hunter thing. The details aren't super important, right? And then at some so part of the story is that in the East there is this mythical kingdom of like Wyveria, which is like wyverns. Everything's a wyvern in Monster Hunter. And they had created artificial monsters, one of which was an extinct monster, and it is a thing that had attacked this character, and it has gone crazy, right? Because they were built to like not require to eat or predate. They were just like protectors. Guardians is what they're called. But this one has kind of gone off script and like started attacking other monsters, which is like, what the hell is happening, right? And your main character, like you're at the point where like, you know, you have to kind of you have to put it down because you're a monster hunter, right? Like it's like doing too much damage to the environment. And Nana says, no, we shouldn't kill it. It's just trying to survive. And you have to be like, I'm sorry, but the ecosystem needs this. This is the right thing to do, right? And that's fine. That's an okay enough lesson,
Okay.
right? But like, you know, you get the attitude behind him, right? The next thing that happens is that this power source in the kingdom is like this network of white goo that like is. We find out that there is a monster embedded in the network that is causing problems, it's causing all this wild weather, and it's also causing problems, right? And so we find out that this kid, he has a pendant around his neck, which is like the MacGuffin. You throw it into the thing, and it destroys the network, and it solves the problem, but it like destroys his valuable thing that is going to, that is kind of powering the environment. So your characters walk up to this thing, and he's like, I know what I need to do. And then your character says, no, we don't have to do it this way. And he's like, I have another solution. And because it's Monster Hunter, the solution is you beat the fucking monster to death with your weapon, right? Like, he's like, this is the correct solution, is to beat the monster to death, which is, you know, also kind of like wild. It's like, you know, you're taking away this hero moment. It's like, no, the correct answer is to this is like the you know, the Pikachu uses Thunderbolt problem. Is like when you're a monster hunter, the way you solve the problem is you hunt monsters. So and that's your credit scene, right? The post credits story is you find out that this monster that the first one that you killed, that the kid Nada was like, oh, don't kill this monster. It actually managed to lay eggs, right? It has found a way. Right, like, you know, as Ian Malcolm says, life finds a way, right?
Sure.
But one of the eggs has been infected with the frenzy virus, right? And the frenzy virus is this thing in Monster Hunter World that makes them wild, like that makes them like uncontrollable predators that predate without eating. They just destroy the environment, right? So you've come upon this thing, this creature that's been extinct for millions of years, right, or whatever, or thousands of years, or whatever in lore. And it's just rampaging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, and you're like, and you know, you're sitting there, and Nada looks at you and says, "Put it down for its own sake," right? Like he's got totally 180. He's like, "No, we need to kill the fucking monster," right? Like, which is just totally fucking wild to me, right? It's like, I cannot believe that the moral of this story is actually beat the monster to death. And I'm playing Hunting Horn, so it's like, beat the monster to death with your saxophone. This is the correct this is the correct decision, right?
That's the part that I like. Beat the monster to death with your fucking saxophone.
All right, so I just needed to tell somebody about that because it was just wild to me. Like, you know, the kind of like, this is the opposite of what you would expect it to be if this were like a movie, right? Like, you just kind of like, oh, well, the monster hunter's got to hunt monsters. But the other thing we're going to talk about is, we talked about PF2E stuff a bunch last week, and you laid out a bunch of your kind of like house rules for the campaign that we're going to play shortly. And one of the things that you brought up is this thing called party advantage, which I think is a very clever system. Do you want to explain it for the folks at home?
Yeah, so party advantage is very straightforward. Whenever the whole party would roll for a check, so say you walk up to an abandoned village, and you would normally say, everybody roll a perception check, right? Instead of that, you say roll a perception check with party advantage, and two people in the party. Advantage obviously means you roll 2d20. Party advantage is two different people roll their perception checks. So typically it means the best two players get to roll their perception checks. Which I mean, I'm looking to solve a number of problems with it, which we could talk about, but that's just how the system works.
Yeah, no, and I think it's actually a fairly elegant solution, but I think it butts up against how specifically recall knowledge works. I don't know if it'd have the same problem in 5e. You'd have to tell me, just because I didn't encounter the same problem. But recall knowledge as a check in Pathfinder is kind of like, you know, you're usually rolling against one of the big four are Arcana, Nature, Occult, and Religion, which correspond to the four magical traditions. And sometimes you also wrap Society into that, because Society is kind of like the, do you know who this like this is like kind of like the knowledge history check, right? It's like, Steve the Grand was here. It's like, who was Steve the Grand? You roll society to figure that out, right?
Sure. Okay.
And the way that this kind of ends up working out in play from what I've seen or from what I've experienced is at early levels, everybody just rolls on every one of these checks because like the DC is like between 15 and 20. And even if you're not trained in the skill, you might hit it, right? As you get higher levels, people, the person who's untrained stops rolling against it because, you're not going to hit the DC 35, right? Even if they roll a 20, right? Like they're this is like the fail by 10 thing. DC 35, if the max you can get is a 22, even if you roll a 20, that upgrades from a critical failure to a failure. So you don't get anything, right? Like, but the way that it works kind of at a little bit higher levels is like, the topmost person will roll, or the second topmost person will roll and aid another check, which is like usually a really easy check to hit. And the topmost player will roll on top of that. And then also like you might have somebody else trying to roll a different knowledge skill, right? Like instead, the example I gave to you is like you find a shrine in the swamp to a deity, and like you've got, the cleric rolling knowledge religion. Maybe Steve the rogue is rolling another on that check, and maybe Bob, like, the swamp ranger has lore swamp, and so he's rolling lore swamp because that's very specialized. And what is the way to put it to? Lore skills are generally the flavor for your character, so you want to be an expert in that. And two, the lore skills typically have lower DCs than the pure knowledge skills, right? As kind of an incentive to use your lore skills. And so the party advantage check doesn't always work with that. And this also dovetails with another problem that I have seen, or it's not really so much a problem as it's a feels bad man type thing, right? Which is, Steve, let's use my example, right? Like Alice the cleric and Steve the rogue, right? Steve the rogue rolls to aid. Steve rolls an 18, smashes the 25 DC, right, and gives Alice a +3. Alice rolls a 3, and so ends up scoring less than Steve would have if he had just taken his role as the as the role, and that just kind of feels bad, man, right? And that's something that something like party advantage helps with, right? Like it kind of like eliminates that problem. And so just to pitch to you what I had been thinking about in my head as like a proto custom role for this is something what I was going to call something like a council role, right? Like when you're going to attempt a knowledge check, you have everybody who you have to be at least trained in it, right? To attempt the roll, and everybody in that situation makes the roll, and you take the top roll as the primary check, and then you take the second highest roll as the aid another check, and that kind of like gets rid of this kind of like, well, if we had Steve make the aid roll, then we would have actually made the check, or if we had Steve made the primary roll and Alice make the secondary roll or the aid roll, we would have actually hit the check, even though from a pre-roll point of view that was the wrong quote unquote choice to do. And so that I just wanted to explain to you that was my proto system for this. And
okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So one of the things that's complicated is I don't actually deal with this all that often when it comes to knowledge checks. Knowledge checks tend to be, because I do think that there's an inherent, this has never come up, but I think if I were to ask, like Lou in the chat, maybe you can correct me. I think if I were to ask Lou in the chat or any of the other members of 7th Expedition why we understand party advantage for some of our checks, but we don't roll party advantage all that often on like a history check, it's probably because people are kind of natively sort of untrained. This is also just that Warren's character is like a giga maxed wizard who does insane on these checks kind of naturally, and so tend not to need it. Warren almost always kind of nails them because they just built this character who is good at knowledge checks kind of thing. But it is interesting that on the recall knowledge specifically, this kind of thing doesn't trigger. It is so in the council, it's everybody who is trained, and you take the top 2. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it would be like, so the thought in my head for this is like, it's okay. We see this symbol on the wall, right? And it's like, I know religion, Alice the cleric knows religion, the skill monkey knows religion, and maybe somebody else, happens to be trained in religion because they had an extra, the wizard knows religion because he has 1,000 skill points and he needed to put it somewhere, right? And it's like,
Sure.
in my head, it's like these three characters stand in a circle and discuss what they know, right? And so that's a collaborative effort to figure out what it is. And, that kind of like fits the model in my mind of what's happening. The trained thing is there just to like, the trained requirement is there because this is me like, it's like, well, if you give this option to a player who's like looking to edge the system, they'll be like, I'll just roll on the council check because why not, right? And so like,
Yeah, this is part of why I want party advantage. The goal is to reduce, like, the hard line goal is to reduce the raw number of rolls that are targeting any individual check. And the reason why is because with a party of 5 people, it's essentially saying you always pass these checks. I feel like whenever I'm in a game and somebody's like, okay, everybody roll a perception check, somebody's going to get it because when you roll 5d20, someone's going to roll the 18. And even if their perception is dog shit, they're going to kind of get close enough in order to make it, in order to make it work. It's a little interesting in Pathfinder because in Pathfinder, the DCs get much higher. And the percentage that the die makes of your success or failure rate, just on the raw variance, right, kind of gets lower and lower, right? If you think of the average check of a, let's say an average check of a level 1 game, check of a level 10 game, an average check of a level 20 game. The average check of a level 1 game is probably 12 or something, right? You could roll 100% of that just on the die, right? Maybe at a 10, you would, I don't know, what are the DCs decreased by 10? Would it be 22? Would that be like reasonable?
Yeah, let me actually, there's like a standard DC, because I think it does scale up a little bit more aggressively because you anticipate that people have like at least trained or like are climbing up, like, so the standard DC for a level 1 check is 15 and a level 10 check is 27.
Okay, yeah, so interesting. On 15, you are covering and then some, so on the check, right? But then you go up to level 20, now 27. Now you need, in order to beat that check, you need to add 20 only represents a portion of it, right? 75% ish of what your power can be. You have to supplement it with at least 7 points and probably more of just raw, like math on top of it.
I was
Bonuses
gonna say,
on top.
if you're trained in both positions, right, your bonus is going to be a +2 at level 1, right? So you have to roll a 13 or better, and it's going to be +12 at level 10. So you have to roll actually a 15 or better. But the thing is that you are probably expert or master by that point, right? So you get another 2 to 4 on top of that.
Yeah, but really what I'm trying to explain is just that, like, the thing that can to the success, each individual point that gets assigned to beating the DC, more and more of that falls away from the die and comes from your personal bonuses. In early levels, it's almost always the die, or it's not almost always the die. It's just that it can possibly be represented most of all by the die, right? And in later levels, it is, you are combining some level of you and that. And so that's a thing that D&D 5e doesn't really do, because in D&D 5e, the bounds are lower, which means that the variance of the die matters much more. Basically, anybody, it feels like, could probably roll pretty good, checks and roll a 17 or something like that in order to get across kind of the finish line. Is there a reason that people do this aid another thing and they don't just roll dice? This is like mathematically in my head, if I'm rolling probabilities, I almost always just want to roll the second die. I would never want to aid another. Like, the +1 does not matter as much as rolling another die. Right?
Because usually the second best person is significantly less good than the primary person, right? Like, for instance, the way this usually happens in the game that I'm playing, my character is legendary in religion, so he's got like and he's like, he's a cleric, so he's got wisdom, so that's the correct stat for religion. And so he's got like it's like 20 plus like 5 from wisdom plus 8 from legendary. And then like probably some kind of like a variegated bonus I have somewhere from like an item or something, right? So that's like what, like 30 something. Whereas the rogue, he has his 20 levels, but he probably has it at like expert or master, so that's only 4 or 6 extra, and he doesn't have the wisdom for it, so that's like significantly worse. So he can definitely hit the check. He can definitely hit the aid check. but he can't necessarily, or he's probably not going to hit like the dice variation, because I actually don't think I quite agree with you on this dice variation thing. It will for an individual character, but like the numbers are tight enough that there's actually it's not as bad as D&D, I'll say, but for characters who are at least trained, the die does pretty well control, or it does have a significant impact on your success rate up and down the chain.
Well, it's not that the die doesn't have the success rate. It's that the die relative to your bonus. Do you know what I mean?
No. So I know what you're saying, but because the DCs scale at the same rate that the skills does, it actually has a pretty close approximation, right? Like, let's take this level 1 and level 12 example, right? If you're just trained, the die actually matters more at level 10, right? Assuming no other bonus, right? Because like, let's say your stats don't change and you're just trained, right? You're getting a plus 12 at level 10 and a plus 2 at level 1. If the standard DC is 15.
Okay, yeah, so this is a little different. So what you're saying is the percent chance that I succeed on the check is still the same between level 1 and level 12, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is true. It's a little different of what I'm describing. What I'm describing isn't between the same person who is trained. It is between the person who is trained and the person who's untrained, right?
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm describing.
Yeah.
The variance can make up much more of an untrained person's success rate, basically, and that matters more for something like D&D.
I was gonna say, I think the like for Pathfinder, I think the better comparison would be someone who's like trained and someone who's expert. Just because like if you're untrained, you just fall off so fast, right? Like by level 5, you're like not.
Yeah, because with untrained, you don't get your level to the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, so the honestly, we could do the math on this, and I'm kind of tempted to a little bit, because is it better to roll a second D20, or you could just roll the math on, okay, I have the plus 30, and when does it become better for me to get an additional plus 2 to hit the DC versus have the person roll the second D20?
Yeah.
And we could math this out if we like did a probability table, basically. But I don't know that math off the top of my head.
I know that there's a YouTube video by I think Matt Parker. He's like a British mathematician, and he's like, "How good is advantage actually?" or something like that. I had never watched the video, but it like showed up in my recommendeds a bunch of times.
I think I have watched this video, because this is part of what I did not understand how good advantage was until I watched a YouTube video on it, and I think it was
the table. Okay, it's actually not.
This is the guy. Oh, never mind. I'm sorry. I did not watch this video, but I do know who you are talking about, because he made a video about speedrunners. Do you know about the Dream speedrunning scandal?
Yes. Yeah,
he is the mathematician who made the most popular video explaining why we know that Dream cheated, basically.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I received an email from a.
Sorry, people in the chat can hear me like looking at these videos. Apparently, there's like apparently the big video for this is like there's like a guy called Joseph Newton who did a big video on it too that's got a lot of views. So maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. Oh no, it's definitely the Matt Parker one. The Matt Parker one's got like 1 million views. But yeah, I will go and watch these maybe and figure it out. But your point is, yeah, like maybe it's actually always better to roll the second die.
Yeah, like I would say it is better to roll that. Like that's me talking about the math. On the raw experiential level, I think it's better to roll the second die every time. I think the 8 another is always wrong, because I think it's better. I think, but I maybe am making the case that I think party advantage is better than your council idea, but I will sidestep that for a second just to say that.
Well, the council idea is strictly better because it lets everybody. It's basically rolling with advantage, and you're picking which one is like. So the idea behind the council is everybody rolls their die, and you pick the best result as like the primary.
So I'm talking about experientially. Part of what I'm looking to do is speed up the nature of these checks. And just asking two people roll the check, right? That's just a much faster interaction than, I'm gonna roll the 8 another. Oh, you want to roll the 8? No, I actually think I should roll the 8 another on this one. Because it's like all that dirtling. That's the kind of shit I'm trying to get rid of, basically.
So the way the council check solves this is you don't do that. You just have everybody roll a die, say the results, and then the top one is the result, and then you add, 2 from the second highest result, right? Like,
yeah, okay. Well, so yeah, I mean that is different than what essentially I am arguing that on the experiential level, I think the aid and other side of things just like sucks. It's like less fun basically than because it slows like it not on the level of the math, just on the level of it slows the game down, right? I will also think the council thing. I would probably say the council thing is maybe a more like a technical solution, but it's probably less intuitive. Maybe
sure,
you would have to do it a bunch of times. I feel
right.
like people, once I explained party advantage to people, everybody gets it because the concept of advantage is you roll 2d20 and you're just having 2 people in the party roll their d20s. But like theoretically, if you explain the council and do it 10 times, maybe everybody would just kind of get it.
Right. And that's the thing here, right? Like, I know it's not intuitive. Part of this is that, like, Pathfinder is built with another in mind, right? It's not built with advantage,
Yeah, that's
right?
fair.
Whereas essentially, like, the council thing brings advantage. It effectively brings advantage into Pathfinder because you are picking the best. You're essentially rolling with advantage, picking the best, and then like also adding another +2 on top of it, right? Like most of like 90% of the time, right? Like,
yeah, this is the thing that what's his face said, which I really liked actually. I hated his interview, the Mike Merles interview that I was in our D&D chat. I went off on because I think he was shitting on D&D 2024, but he was just using really stupid arguments that really bothered me because it was like it was bad faith essentially, right? But anyway, the thing that he said that I did agree with though is he talked about why they really liked advantage, and he was talking about how he was like the math doesn't matter. What matters is telling someone to pick up a second d20, telling them that they have advantage on the check, and letting them roll it is an elegant thing, right? It is a quick, intuitive way that they can understand that they have better odds to succeed on the check because they are rolling, sort of advantage, even if the math is what like kind of like whatever the math is, and so I think that there's a little bit of sort of value assigned to that. The other thing with the council thing that's complicated is would it only really work for sort of like an aid another, I'm sorry, a recall knowledge kind of situation?
If I were doing it, I would. So part of my reason for coming up with this solution was the idea that like, like in my head, like the fantasy experience of like a bunch of people putting their heads together to solve a problem, right? And like this is the way you can do that without it like, without because like, there's never this is the same problem that party advantage has. There's never a reason for the third person to like roll their check, right? And part of this is that there's not a lot of use for these skills outside of these recall knowledge situations, right? So it's like, Bob the Wizard has Arcana, Steve the Sorcerer has Arcana, and like, Joe the Rogue has Arcana, but Joe the Rogue is much worse than the other two. He's like rarely ever actually rolling that Arcana check. Like maybe like in combat, like you can recall knowledge in combat, and that's like a separate kind of application, but that's also tends to be a little bit less
this is the biggest downside I think to party advantage is basically you only ever want 2 people trained in a thing at a time because you are always kind of cutting off the bottom end of the like the party, and I would obviously argue that I'm willing to make that trade because speeding the game up and getting rid of this fucking stupid dirtling and making it so that these checks aren't just auto succeed is like important, even if it is kind of like only at sort of like low levels. But then also part of it is that you said in Pathfinder perception works differently.
Well, I mean, it works differently than every other skill in that everybody's at least trained in perception.
Oh, I see what you.
Yeah, so I think this makes super good sense for perception because it definitely has this problem, right? So the thing that party advantage solves really well for is this D&D problem that you're talking about, where like everybody's actually within striking range of the DC, so there's no reason for not everybody not to roll. Once you get like past level 5 in Pathfinder, if you're not at least training the skill, there's really not a point on rolling on kind of like an arbitrary check like that.
Oh, this is interesting. Lou in the chat says, I think I like the way we're doing party advantage over the other ways. I've seen it, but I don't have experience with council. But the other method I've seen is having the whole party roll, and you have to have more successes than fails to succeed as a group. That's brutal. That is an insane system just on the math, right? Because well, like, wow, that's a brutal system. I actually think that system is maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm sort of estimating the math wrong. But basically, here's the napkin math I'm doing in my head. What are the number of checks that people are trained in? Is that greater or lower sort of than 50%? It's always lower, right? Let's say you have a 4 or 5 person party and everyone in that party is trained on fewer than 50% of the skills. You are almost always, like on rate, every skill check you roll, you are more likely to have 3 people who are untrained than, like, you are always less than that half, basically. So I just feel like you are always going to, like, that's a really brutal sort of system. You'd have to nerf the DCs, I think, actually would be the only way to handle that. Because if we're saying that the average skill check probably has, I don't really know. If there are 20 skills, I think people only get about 5 of them. That's 75%. I would say that in a normal party, 3 out of every 4 players are probably not trained in the skill. Maybe I would actually say that's 60%. Maybe I would say that in a party of 5, 3 out of 5 are untrained in sort of the skill. And so you're always rolling against 3 untrained checks. That's just like brutal on the math of it, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Just a thing to bring up, actually thinking about it, right, is like party disadvantage. As described, like, do you know about Follow the Expert?
No.
Okay, so party disadvantage would make stealth checks impossible in Pathfinder, except that there's a thing called Follow the Expert, which is an exploration activity that, like, basically says if there's somebody with expert training or higher in your party, you get like your level to a roll against it, right? And this is primarily used for stealth, right? Like,
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That is actually interesting. Party disadvantage is actually a nerf to stealth, which is sort of intentional, to be honest with you. What I want is I want one player to be stealthy and go do scouting. I don't want the whole party to stealth in and be able to ambush, basically.
No,
does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And like,
yeah,
essentially Follow the Expert kind of gets you to that point in a way that's at least like reasonable. Like, it would be like D&D 5e. It would be copacetic with D&D 5e. Just to put it out there, this cleric that I've been playing for like years and years, right? He's the only one in the party that doesn't have is untrained in stealth. And so early encounters would be like the 4 members of the party would like sneak around the back, and then my character, who's like, the lawful neutral cleric of Abadar, walks up and says,
full plate,
stomps up and says, "Hello, you're under arrest," right? Like,
you're under arrest is pretty funny. Yeah. With party disadvantage, I'm specifically actually trying to nerf stealth because I don't want every. This is something that I think is less, but it is, technically speaking, I think, the optimal way to play. And if players were to sort of engage on it, especially with kind of party advantage as a if party advantage exists and you let it resolve all of your full group checks, you make it so that they are always ambushing because they're party advantaging out of their worst rolls, basically. And so when I conceived of party advantage, I realized that I had to include disadvantage as well, because otherwise it's too good on the stealth side of things. And stealth is really the only place where I think it matters. It sometimes matters in other checks, and listen, Lou, put earmuffs on, but I tend to nerf those on the GM side of things. So for instance, we did an encounter that had something to do with like a rope or something, and it was like everybody was making these athletics checks at party disadvantage, and that was like a nice, like, tense kind of encounter, but I was essentially nerfing the nature of that encounter to a point where it was tense, but nobody was really in danger of sort of like losing so catastrophically that they truly kind of like fucked up. But yeah, that was my thinking at the time.
And I think this makes sense, right? Like, because the idea is that party advantage is for a situation where one out of anybody needs to make the check, and party disadvantage is where everybody needs to make the check, right? And the way
party disadvantage is one out of anybody failing the check fails the check,
right. Like everybody needs to make the check, or
But like the good version of this has happened in not in a little bit in 7th Expedition, but actually mostly in the Dragonlance game, because Sarian is trained in stealth as like a stealth archer ranger or whatever. And so I think we did one party disadvantage check on stealth, and he realized how awful it was. And so now he is constantly like the scout, right? Going off and doing sort of like the scout stuff, and then sort of setting, which I think this is good. You never want to have the scout player sort of playing their own little mini game, which does sometimes happen on kind of like a narrative sort of side questy. You spend 15 minutes adjudicating a stealth sort of thing. But like what you want to be able to give them kind of the benefit of like the lay of the land, and they get to place themselves and some of that kind of stuff, but like not be able to pull off the full surprise round ambush kind of bullshit that is like frankly really super powerful. I feel like if everybody gets to enter, Baldur's Gate taught me a lot of this. If you get to enter every single fight from stealth, you get so much extra power just off of like a surprise round kind of.
So perhaps this is a thing to note, is there aren't really surprise rounds in Pathfinder entering.
Oh, really?
What Pathfinder, like if you enter combat in stealth, you get to roll stealth for your initiative instead of perception. Is like the benefit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which is for characters with stealth. That's like, and also if actually, just to be very clear, if everybody enters combat and succeeds at their stealth check, and like the enemies are not aware of them, like they get rounds in combat, but they can't see people, right? So they can't. There's like a whole stealth stack that I'll send you the page for. That is like how stealth gets adjudicated. It's like, and if they're unaware of you, they just kind of like walk around like they're doing nothing, right? But like if they are like, it's like, you hear a rustle, right? Like you can be aware of somebody but not see them, and so like this is like a
they
video
have nothing
game.
to attack.
Yeah, but they're like, hello, who's there, right? That kind of thing, right? Like,
I have always wanted to sort of do that fantasy, but I just think it's impossible. Like I have given up on like, you would have to build out a whole sort of party built for stealth, I think, in order to accomplish that, which is not like it's not like a normal thing.
So I just want to say that I think I like this party disadvantage thing is because like the way that these checks usually work out, and less for stealth and more for like these athletics checks that you're talking about, is the person who's really good at it trivially gets across and then does a bunch of stuff to help the people who are less good at it get across. And I think that's actually good teamwork. Like that's a good thing for the party to be doing. And if you want to just kind of like hand wave away the people who are good at it doing it, I think that's fine, right? Like it's like, you make the two worst people do the disadvantage roll, but you allow them the opportunity to be like, all right, well, the people who don't have to make this roll are like tossing a rope across, right? And so they're like trying to like build up bonuses for the bad people to get across, and that's I think is a valuable exercise.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
But and
are you excited for more Pathfinder 2e stuff? What do you want to do?
I want to see what everybody else wants to do, because I'm happy to like help guide other people, and I'm happy to kind of like fill in a role. Something that I don't think we got to during our primer was that like you can do non-magical healing pretty effectively out of combat with the medicine skill.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like go read the medicine skill, and it even gets a couple of like in combat options. It's not going to be as good as like a cleric, but
so you don't need to like have a healer.
Yeah,
come with you.
Yeah, and like there's also like a bunch of kind of like technically mundane healing options. Like the cleric and the investigator, I believe, both have like healing options. Or not the cleric, the alchemist and the investigator both have kind of like medicine healing options that are like a little bit more combat healy, like more like traditional healy. And the bard gets a couple of healing spells, that kind of thing. So,
okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How often do you feel like healing matters in combat for your Pathfinder parties?
Quite a bit. Just because things hit pretty hard. And it's not like it's not like the cleric is all they're doing is healing, but like it's definitely a thing that's useful to like spend time on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
anything else you want to talk about before we jet out of here and go to raid?
I think I'm good.
All right. Well, with that, if you'd like to email us about any of the things we talked about on this podcast, email us at subderpsgames@gmail.com or podcast@subderpsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/subderpsplaygames or youtube.com/subderpsgames. These go out live. Rate and review us wherever you find podcasts. All the links should be down in the description. Buddy, do you have anything you're looking to promote?
Brain World Watchers out, I guess. Go play that. And then also we announced, did I mention this? We announced the release date for Repose, which is on April 14th, 2 weeks from yesterday. So listen, I'm all about releasing games. Okay, we're releasing lots of games so far this year.
Oh, you know what, buddy? You know what I just realized?
What's that?
It's April Fool's Day. We didn't do a food episode. Yeah, I know, right?
Oh my God, you're right.
Oh.
That sucks. We could have done an April Fool's episode.
Oh,
I wasn't even thinking about it. I was not even fucking thinking.
Yeah, neither was I. All right. Well, with that stunning realization, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners. Oh my God.